Well, hello, this is Leonard Simpson, and welcome to our podcast, Never Mind the Chaos. Um, I'm partner with 2020 Financial Advisors and joined by my co-host, Michael Chastain of Chastain Jones Law. And it's our pleasure today to have as our guest David Gauntlett of Gauntlett and Associates law firm. How are you, David?
I'm good. I just wanted to mention that we go by gauntletlaw.com on our website.
Hey, thanks for clarifying that. So we always find this quite interesting in visiting with our attorney guests. And one of the things I always like to find out is, you know, how did your journey begin? I know you took a degree in European history, if I'm not mistaken, from Irvine University, and then ended up going to Berkeley for law school. So, how did you end up getting a degree in European history, and what were your intentions at that time?
Well, when I was in fifth grade, my history teacher asked if I wanted to teach history. And I said, no, I'd rather make money. And he said, the two are not compatible. And I told him, my father's a teacher, and I know that's not the case. And so it was always the intention that I do something like law school. And so
Okay,
that was just a given. And on the interim, you needed a course of study that you enjoyed, and that was
right.
true of me. My mother's French. She left after the war to come to the
Okay,
States, where she joined my grandmother, who left before the war. Uh, and she worked at MGM Studios as a hat maker with my grandmother for a time before she got married and they settled down. And um, they were from the Pacific Palisades area at the time. And so my journey was always focused on that. And in law school it was then called Boltow, now Berkeley Law. My roommate was a Dartmouth All-American swimmer whose father was a VP of Bechtel, and they raced horses. And it was a different kind of person that I'd met at UC Irvine. And we became friends. He took me to the races a lot. And he ended up going to Paul Hastings. But he took a circuitous path because he clerked for the DC Circuit and then Justice Powell. Having him as a roommate was a bit challenging because he was a bright guy. And so I was always challenged to keep up with him. We used to play backgammon late at night. And I generally did better at 2 a.m. plus. So I realized that stamina had some benefits. And that's something I try to always roll back to.
interesting. Now, so you came out of law school and you worked briefly with several firms and real estate litigation, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, Paul Hastings had a rotation system, and in 19, right around when I joined them, I guess it was 1980, interest rates were about 20%. So a lot of developers were unenthusiastic about projects. And so my rotation was accelerated, and I went into employment, which was where my roommate ended up being the head of the San Francisco office when he joined Paul Hastings after he finished his clerkships. And so I did that for a time, worked with Paul Grossman, discrimination. I also did traditional employment things. And that was really the practice there. And I did it for a time. And I saw that people were not making partner because the economy was a bit down. And so I was noticing that living in a mothership forever wasn't necessarily a pathway. And so I ended up migrating to a firm called Spenceley Horn, Jubis and Lubitz in Century City, which was closer to where I wanted to live at the time in Westwood. And they had intellectual property practice. And I enjoyed that area and I found it of interest. But over time, I was keeping my options open, and I found a bunch of Harvard Law classmates that had escaped and found a firm in Torrance called Berkeley Moore Greenberg and Lyman, and they were a real class act, and they had some very interesting practice. opportunities, and they really were planning to put me into some interesting cases. And so they, gave me more compensation as I was kind of moving along, and I joined them there for a couple of years. And then I decided, I'd like to be in a situation where I had a fast track to partnership, and they were a little partner heavy. And so I found a peripatetic Irishman in Orange County named Dan Callahan, who was looking for a senior associate to put on a fast track to partnership because he had more work than he could handle. And he needed to have somebody that could help him with the flow. And he sold snow to Eskimos. He was really good at developing business and creating relationships. And so I came on board, and we started doing work for S&L mid-level people. Charles Keating is an example of somebody at Lincoln Savings and Loan who got directors and officers insurance. But what about everybody below him? He grabbed all the opportunities to do the work at his expense. And so they were left high and dry. And so I realized that the workers' compensation policy had an employer's liability section with coverage for bodily injury, which included emotional distress. Well, if you've ever seen people at Charles Keating screwed, they were very emotionally distressed. And so we were able to use that to get coverage for unlimited defense fees. Notoriety flowed from that. We got some other interesting cases, and one of them was a waterbed patent infringement case. And I decided to see if I could get insurance coverage for it. And it turned out nobody tried it before. I was successful. I looked around and I said, gee, it was just a matter of reading the policy language and going to the dictionary and jumping up and down and explaining what a patent case was about. And I hired an expert witness named Don Martins to help us with that case. And so he introduced me to the people at Kenobi Martins, which was a firm that grew to be one of the biggest firms, I think actually the biggest firm in Orange County now. And through that relationship, I had a lot of work that flowed, and I did a lot of speeches around the country because I was invited to talk about it. And then people threw copyright and trademark, and I started getting antitrust cases. And I said, gee, even more zeros. This is fun. And so it just kind of grew out of that activity. Matthew Bender asked me to write a chapter, which became a book and a treatise. And I just decided that I like legal writing and legal speaking, and I still do quite a bit of it.
So when you were, it sounds like your original plan had always been, I'm going to go to law school. Did you have a practice area in mind, day one when you showed up at what was then Bolt Hall?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a real estate attorney because that's all that was going on in Orange County. If I couldn't do real estate, what I was going to do. And I did some real estate litigation for a time. And I got to be comfortable with that area. But I found that these other things that came my way were actually more interesting. And I liked making new law. That was very fun. And I really enjoyed that. At Paul Hastings, I was able to get a case thrown out because I went to Dead Cat Alley and found the legislative intent service history of the PRB regulations in an employment case were not complied with, so the whole suit got thrown out. And I got a lot of notoriety as a first year for having pulled that off. And I thought, this is fun. I really like this, and I want to do more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was back in the day where you actually had to physically go into books and libraries. You couldn't pull it off the internet because the internet didn't exist.
There you go. And we had it at Paul Hastings at the time. They had a very elaborate treatise, which they annotated with all the research memos they did. So you had like a super treatise available as a resource, plus very bright, capable people who were enthusiastic about doing employment law. Nice energy flowed around all of that.
Now, you said Paul Hastings had a rotation. So what other practice areas did they have at the time?
Oh, well, they had a litigation department, and I had a brief period there. But again, they weren't quite as busy, and employment was. And they had a transactional area. It was a full service firm, but employment was really the strongest department, and it was the one that they were really making waves in.
Interesting.
So you had this partnership for about 9 years with Callahan, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then
well, at a certain point in time, I was really bringing in all the corporate clients from this case that I pulled off. And he was he brought a contingency case in a trade secret misappropriation case that he pulled off, had to go to the Court of Appeal and state court system to do it. And after that happened, he said, look at all this money I brought in. I think we need to readjust the percentages of income. And I said, well, I've been carrying this place for years. I'm keeping all the associates busy with corporate work from, companies people have heard of. And you got small company, which you're able to get some coverage benefits from. It's really not how I want to structure my practice going forward. And so I decided, and I took 6 associates with me and just found my own firm. It's not that hard when you have a book of business that you've created, existing clients with strong relationships, and associates that are working with you to transfer from place A to B. So it wasn't that huge a risk.
Okay, and
You,
so
you've really, okay, sorry.
oh,
Go ahead,
I was
Mike.
just going to say, between you and your partner Callahan at that time, I mean, who was doing sort of the back end of the firm as far as, you know, I'm not sure how you would refer to it, but I mean, somebody's running the business part of it. Somebody's doing the back end. Someone's
Yeah,
looking at
he was doing the
now.
business part of it. My focus was in bringing new business in and supervising the associates and getting work product. He was a superb writer, really good writer, and so he would, weigh in on various projects and lend his expertise. And we worked well together because I appreciated his skill sets; they were very complementary. But he was. I'd bring him in for stuff, but we'd always have a marketing assistant and I'd train one. And then suddenly they disappeared. They were his marketing assistant. And so that was another little issue of contention.
I see.
So
So then,
you
so
took
you
all
open
these,
up, you leave, open up your own firm, and tell us, was that transition difficult, or it sounds like it might have been pretty straightforward?
Yeah, it was very straightforward. I just went to another office in the next building over from the one I was occupying in the same uh, complex. They were happy to have somebody lease space. And and I had the people who were working there. Initially, we worked out of my then home in Newport North before we got it started. But it's kind of interesting. The firm started in April 1st, which was also the birth date of my one and only daughter. So there's something kind of magic, and we're both on Sundays, so it's like interesting.
Yeah.
what challenges did you face initially being the sole owner and having uh, six associates and I assume other staff as well? Was that
Yeah, I mean,
difficult
we had
transition for
some,
you?
we had to get the right group and mix of people. My wife came on board. She was the directing a contest and incentive at Hyundai. She'd been there for a number of years, started the operation when they moved from Korea to the United States. They replaced her with 3 people when she retired. And then
Mhm.
she basically helped me, and she's still helping me in my law firm today. She manages the money and all of that kind of stuff, so I don't need to deal with any of those issues. Um, so
Okay.
that was an important part of it.
Do
Are most of
you,
those associates still with you?
Um, the original associates, they've moved on. The one I have, I think Jim's been me about 25 years. Robert, most of my people have been with me, a number of years. But I have 2 young associates. One's a first year, another a second.
Hmm.
And I have one lateral that is in San Diego. We went remote in 2020 for obvious reasons.
Okay. Okay.
And my problem is I still had a lease, so I had the most expensive storage facility in America, with all my desks and stuff there. And I'd occasionally go in, but it was just depressing to be there without a bunch of other people.
Oh,
But I have people in New Mexico, Ohio, and various places in California, because that's where they want to live for their own reasons. I'm fine with that. They work seamlessly with me. We do a lot of Zooms. We do a lot of telephone calls. I had to learn
so
how to pay people in New Mexico and Ohio. Ohio's much better than New Mexico as an employer, if anybody's interested.
what part of New Mexico are they?
Just a little north of Albuquerque. It's kind of a development. A lot of people who work at Los Alamos live in this particular space. And he basically sold his house, and for 20% of what he received, was able to buy a place in New Mexico of comparable size and value. It's like kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, that's where I live. I live in Santa Fe. So,
Okay. Yeah,
um,
my best friend from growing up in high school is in Santa Fe. He's a studio artist, and he does all sorts of interesting things. He just sold some drop cloths to Restoration Hardware as art, $20,000 for a drop cloth with paint on it. And I thought this is pretty creative.
yeah, interesting. So you're fully remote at this point. You have
Yeah,
no actual office.
correct.
Interesting.
Well, I have an office you're talking to me at. It's just been my residence. I mean, the
Okay.
bad news is it's 2020. You have to stay home. It was like party on down, you know. I was
Well, you
pretty
don't have to
comfortable with that.
now. I mean, you have the option of having an office. I
Why
mean,
would anybody want an office? Totally irrelevant on you. It's just an expense point.
mhm.
I mean, it's like having a partner that doesn't do anything and just sits there and collects money.
So do you guys do much in the way of collaboration? And you just do all that online, or does everybody pretty much work independently?
Well, I talk to my people 3 or 4 times a day, every day. Even when I just had a cruise, I was in Portugal and Spain, and
Nice.
I was able to interact with them pretty seamlessly. Um, and so it's just a matter of they need direction. I mean, we have 5,000 letters, briefs, and memos. I know what they say. So when I need something, I say, oh, this reminds me of this case we had 12 years ago. And, I have a photographic memory, which kind of helps.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I use that to remember stuff.
So one of the things that I think we've noticed as we've been interviewing or talking to folks is that um, new hires, the new generation of lawyers seems to be a little different than they were back in the day. Have you had any challenges with hiring the new millennials or whatever generation they're calling themselves now? Um,
Not really. I mean, I have a first year who's got a really great work ethic, and she's compensated by what she bills. And she loves that because she's a hard worker and she makes more money doing that than she would have otherwise. She wanted to be at home, you know, and she lives in Glendale. And there's no, I might not have sourced her. She didn't want to drive into downtown LA to do her work, and she'd worked for some other law firms. And there's a lot of things she doesn't know, but she's very trainable, and she's
mhm.
picking things up, and she's got, like I said, a great work ethic. Another person who was a writer before for a couple of years, and those skill sets are great. He works on my blogs, and we kind of do that together. And he's kind of a gamer, and so I'll often get a project that he works from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'll see it in my desk. That works for him, you know. Um,
Interesting.
and so I can be
Interesting.
flexible with people. One of my associates has 4 kids, 2 of whom are at college age, and 2 youngsters, and we work around her schedule so
Mhm.
she can do what she wants to do. And I compensate people in a way that gives them value. But you're going to make more if you make more for me.
All right.
So you've been
So,
operating under this structure since
2020.
post-COVID,
Yeah.
2020.
so does your practice, because I guess I'm not all that clear on, does your practice ever require any kind of court appearances or are
Well,
all
during
those,
Zoom, I had 5 federal appellate court appearances, all Zoom. So it saved me a
and they're
bunch.
still allowing that, huh?
Now,
On the
that
civil
was
side.
that was through about 2022 or so.
Okay.
So I just had I have 5 cases in New York. I had one. I was just have a hearing. I have another hearing in the Second Circuit. They'll be scheduling. Yeah. So I have to go. I have to appear to court. I have a court hearing tomorrow in federal court here in Santa Ana.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then I have another one in the Ninth Circuit in Pasadena that'll be set sometime probably in January.
Okay. So you do all the court appearances. You don't
Yeah.
fly your folks in from New Mexico or wherever.
Nope.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Because I
And you,
mean,
you've really,
that's sort of what I do. I mean, I have a compendium of knowledge of the cases we've worked on. It makes sense for me to do those.
Mhm.
But I'll certainly have my people assist in all the drafting and the analysis because the price point for them is better.
Right.
You've really created a niche market.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, in addition to that case where we got the mid-level S&L people, one of the next cases we had was that patent coverage case, and it basically involved the fact that the commercial liabilities policy sold everybody in America had something they covered called piracy. And if you look at the dictionary, it covers patent infringement, trademark infringement, copyright infringement. Nobody had ever kind of put the pieces together, and I needed to show an advertising nexus. And it turns out if you induce patent infringement by advertising the combination of two different elements to create a final product, that advertising is a wrongful act in and of itself. So you have advertising of activity that's creating liability for patent infringement. And so I've taken that around the country. I won a case in Supreme Court in Nebraska on the same grounds. Almost got to the Texas Supreme Court, but we ended up settling before the last period. And I've had like 12 Supreme Court state appearances. I've been in every federal court of appeals. I just got a case reversed under Texas law that was a COVID coverage case by the Fifth Circuit, which is not easy for my client, South by Southwest, who basically in 2020 couldn't put the festival on because of COVID. And if you turned what you got as a credential, you paid a lot of money for it, said no cash refunds. And the carrier's argument, well, it's a breach of contract, exclusion. And I said, no, it's a conversion unjust enrichment case because it couldn't be a contract breach. And the Fifth Circuit finally got it right, and they reversed and found that they were obligated to defend and pay settlement. And in Texas, you get your coverage fees because, it's being a bad actor in Texas is not a good thing to do. And right now we're working on a bunch of stuff. I'm trying to establish under New York law, since it's a jurisdiction in which the complaint is the trigger of the insurer's duty, 5 other jurisdictions have that rule. If you have late notice, if there's no prejudice to the insurer and no voluntary payments provision that bars a defense reimbursement claim, the carrier's on the hook.
I'm sorry,
How'd you
what's
find
that
your way
mean?
into it? Yeah, go ahead.
So to be a little clearer, typically an IP attorney calls me and said, hey, I'd like to get coverage. Okay, great. Why are you calling me now? Well, we settled the case and we'd like to get the settlement money we paid plus all my defense fees. So you've never told the insurer about the case? Nah, I didn't want to get him involved. And I said, okay, well, we'll see if we can make that happen. And there's some strange rules in New York that make that a possibility. Mm-hmm. If the carrier was always going to say no, you can say no harm, no foul. Mm-hmm. And then you can say, but given that they would have been obligated to pay the reasonable rate in the absence of that, they're on the hook. So it's not an impossible scenario to make happen. So we look at things like that. A lot of folks have employment claims, include wage and hour in California. They look to their employer's liability coverage, which is thinly sold because it's expensive. There's self-insured retentions, all sorts of issues. I go to commercial liability policies. Why? They have an employment rights exclusion, but there's an exception to it if you read it very carefully for invasion of privacy. If you have an invasion of privacy claim, you might have coverage under a GL. It's not excluded if it's part and parcel of the claims against you in an employment matter. Or you might have one after you do a mediation, and that appears to be the only coverage anyone has for the suit. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
So you've really become a student of the language in these contracts.
Yeah, you have to get very nuanced. Every year I do a Hawaii presentation and check on Hawaii law, and I've done things in Minnesota, Ohio, where I've been in all the jurisdictions. I mean, pretty much name a state, I've got something going on there. We have a case in South Carolina right now. Pretty good law down there for policyholders. And so I'm also a student of choice of law and where to bring a claim. A lot of attorneys based in California think, well, of course, California law. I'm going, that's 25th in my list. Law is not that great here. A lot better places to go. And so I'll try to orchestrate the best way to make that happen. And I help people buy policies to make sure they get the best that's available out there based on what I think a court's going to do to it after the fact. Media policies are a big focus, cyber, crime policies, directors and officers, various forms of errors and omissions coverage. I also do a lot of bad faith expert witness work. I have a case in Hawaii where the question is that little bag that says Kona coffee really Kona-based coffee? And the case is settled at all the way up through the primary, but the excess doesn't want to play. And so I'm explaining that no, there's no exhaustion doctrine, and why the Supreme Court found that 10 years ago. So try something else. And so that becomes bad faith. I had a case up in Santa Barbara where they had a $15 million punitive damage award plus all policy benefits. I was the last witness, and I did the bad faith expert testimony. Similar one we just settled under Pennsylvania law, where they basically were found to have a similar process of always wanting to just deny the coverage. And we were able, after I had 2 depositions, because they couldn't believe they hadn't got me to say what they wanted in the first one. And after that, we ended up getting a very successful settlement, which I can't tell you about because it can go to trial and therefore it's confidential.
Nice.
So it's fun. I enjoy all this stuff.
So what are your more long-term plans? I mean, are you going to keep doing this till they drag you out in a body bag, or are you going to retire? What are your plans?
Well, I'm not sure I'll ever retire at this point, but I may reconstitute myself in terms of doing more work floating on a cruise ship. In other words, I may be able to minimize my role and have a large role for other folks. And, I may end up selling my brain if I can get AI. I've been told it's about 5 years to get my 5,000 letters, briefs, and memos proprietary and in a fashion that people could access and have everything in my brain that I've done thus far as work product. And so that might be an interesting thing to license to some larger firm. And we'll see. I'm open to options that haven't yet been fully explored. But as long as I'm having fun, and I like live income, it's kind of fun. Passive is interesting too, but live's, I think, more entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point in time, I may decide that I'm just having too much fun doing other stuff, and maybe the law practice isn't something I need to spend energy on. But I'm not even close to having that sense now.
And David, one of the conversations we've had with a number of the attorney guests we've had on is this, how do you make that exit strategy? What is there a succession plan in place?
Well, the way my firm is structured, the succession plan is not really in play. It's not possible because my people don't bring in business. And so they're not set up to be able to run the firm in my absence. And they don't deal with all those issues. So it's really structured more that if somebody wants me to be a client creator for them, then maybe I have a role in a different organization. There's a lot of firms that have very good policyholder coverage departments with excellent people and are very skilled. And, one of those firms might be a good locus to move forward, but it's not designed to be internally that way. But right now I'm focusing on international client opportunities to do things like bad faith work for suits that are in the US. Also, we've done some commercial litigation, a little aside from what we do, and we realized that a lot of importation of products is not covered by the UCC. And we got very deeply into the foreign law that applies, which is much more friendly to the importer, which is not realized by the people who are here in the States when they cut those deals. And so understanding how to assure that those foreign entities get benefits is something that we're exploring with possible ways in which insurance coverage may play into the plaintiff's suit. I do a lot of help in structuring how plaintiffs sue to make coverage a possible recoverable element.
Interesting.
David, how did you end up in this area of law? Was it by design?
Well, I found that patent coverage opportunity because it was placed into my lap, and I said, "This is fun. There's a lot of zeros here. It's very interesting." And then I even liked antitrust more, and I'm a chair of a small committee in the litigation section on antitrust and its intersection with insurance, and I think it's a fascinating area. I just find that the challenge of making these things all work together is quite intriguing, and I enjoy that. And if it turns out there's enough financial benefit to the client to make worthwhile my involvement, then why not?
Makes sense.
I was hired by an insurance company recently. Oh, I told them I can sue you today, tomorrow, anytime to help draft a policy. And they said, we want the narrowest policy that's legal that you can draft. And I said, I can do that, but you're going to have to get rid of the illusory coverage. You're going to have to write things cleanly so they're conspicuous and clean. You may not like what I'm done with, but I can do a better job than you're doing now. And that was an interesting exercise. It helped me see from the other side of the world the challenges of doing underwriting.
Were they agreeable to doing that? To
Oh yeah,
basically
they
being
signed my
transparent?
agreement that I said I can. I was hired by another insurer to sue Hartford on their behalf. They were a specialty carrier that did trademark coverage. They stepped up, did the right thing after the SIR, self-insured retention, was exhausted, and I sued the GL carrier who owed the whole kit and caboodle from the beginning. And we were successful in doing that. But I told you, just if I'm hired to sue you, I can do it anytime. So, and I just hadn't found the need to do it, but I was not going to handcuff myself.
Sure.
It gives me
Are there a lot?
credibility for expert testimony because I
Yeah.
can say I've worked with insurance
Right.
companies and understand their perspective, and therefore I'm not solely a policyholder representative.
Mm. Are there many other practitioners in your space?
Oh, I mean, there are people that wander in and out of the intellectual property insurance and antitrust insurance interface, but it's not their day job. And I don't think they write exhaustively about it and update their treatises twice a year related to the topic and become students of the law in that area. I think one of the challenges I've had is sometimes the appellate courts are looking for in and out and done, and they don't want to do the heavy lifting to really think through the issues. And a lot of appellate specialists representing insurers have let me find the easiest way to get rid of this case. And they often misstate facts and law. I've had a couple of cases where they basically told the judge, oh, this doesn't say that. And it did. And I have to get up to an appellate court. I said, that's called a misrepresentation of fact to a judge. That's not good. You don't want to reward them for that kind of conduct.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, in most areas of practice, at least in my experience, that occurs. Um, yeah, people misrepresent what cases say, or even cite cases that don't even really touch
Oh, no, I'm
on the
talking
issue.
about the policy doesn't say this and it does.
Right.
That's really pretty blatant. And also a lot of things that create illusory coverage. So, yeah, you have to be, able to flow with those kinds of crazy, assertions. And it's not fun.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Good. Let's see, what else am I interested in? What challenges? Right now I'm looking at possibly bringing in attorneys from South Africa. My local counsel in New York has worked out an arrangement with them. Their English skills are high. They have a very developed jurisprudence system there. And if you pay them as paralegals, they have better return on investment than they get in South Africa as lawyers.
Interesting.
So they would work remote as well
Yeah, of
in
course.
South Africa? In
Yep.
South Africa.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're doing that
interesting.
for this New York attorney I'm working for. And I thought he was
Okay.
pretty clever to orchestrate how it would work. You might have to have them take a night school class to get a JD in order to be able to be certified as paralegals, to charge as paralegals if he's trying to get the billing paid for by a carrier.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not an impossible mix to make that happen. So I'm exploring those kinds of options. A lot of folks are thinking, offshore. And you can also get more senior practitioners that way, and people who have the savvy of having been in a litigation system and fresh perspectives on how to solve problems. We may have a firm in the future that is 24 hours. Hi, South Africa picking up. Oh, here in Los Angeles. Are you there in Singapore? And every 8 hours you just, ching, here's the product, move it on.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, because the demands of business are seamless. They don't understand that you don't need to get it to them until you can wake up in the morning. If they can have a team that can create a seamless work product for them, that works for them because they want you to work on their time and be able to deliver product that they can use instantaneously. And the closer you come to that reality without getting into AI, which I'm not venturing into. The problem is my practice is the challenge is it's not the easiest thing to market because a lot of people don't understand what I do, how I do it, and what it takes to be able to do it. And so explaining that is challenging sometimes.
Mhm.
And so it's not, that's why I've always been very focused on referral sources because they're in a position to do that, vetting. And, I did some direct marketing where I connected with folks. I said, hey, I see you've got a lawsuit that landed and there may be an opportunity for insurance. And I'd say the return was very low because the trust factor wasn't there. No,
Mhm.
like trust is an absolute important triptych to get a new client on board. And so the more important relationships I form are about referral ones, where people get to know that actually he can do what he says he does. About a third of my cases the last couple of months have been by an ex-associate of mine who has an entertainment firm, and he's decided to stop trying to do the coverage work, and he gave it back to me. And we're pointing out that, I mean, you learned some things when you were here, but it's a little more complex. But he's a great, he's an adjunct professor. He's very talented. He does a lot of defamation work. And it's been a nice relationship, And so, in terms of what I would tell other lawyers, is find folks that appreciate what you do, where you can refer them business because they may be in niches you're not there on, and create a synergistic relationship as much as you can.
So you have remote attorneys, remote employees around the country. Now you're thinking about possibly adding a remote paralegal in Africa.
Well, the
Or
paralegal problem is I have no exempt employees, and I want to keep it that way. If they're all exempt, and if I have somebody, I'm trying to figure out how I can orchestrate that. And it's paralegals are not exempt is a problem, and so
right.
that's an issue. And so that's a bit, and it's a sad problem for them because it really makes it hard for them to make the living they could make if they were able to be treated as exempt employees. It would be a huge upcharge in the level of interest and use of them. And I think it's unfortunate because very skilled paralegals can be a great addition to a team.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of noodling these things and looking at what other people do. I'm always fascinated at how problem solving is done by other firms and other folks in similar situations and see if there's something I haven't thought of yet. And I assume there always is. I'm
Mhm.
just one guy with a small firm. I don't know everything.
And it sounds like you manage all the workflow.
Yeah, I do that. I have the person who has the kids was the 25 years at a major policyholder firm, and she basically does some of the administrative oversight, and she does a status report weekly, and then we'll coordinate with her on that. But I keep her in the loop, so I have somebody else who's always kind of watching over these kinds of matters.
Got it.
Interesting. Interesting. So, I mean, if you're not around, you're not available, everything will just fall apart. Is that, I mean, that's
Well,
a challenge you've
if
got to deal with.
yeah, suddenly if there was a car accident, it was terminal. There's life insurance, and my team might have to re absorb themselves and find an appropriate place to uh, play. I've actually told folks that if something happened, here's some firms that you should think about talking to. So that's how they would handle it and say, look, we have this book of business, but we're really not interested in managing, et cetera. And could you, reconstitute it for ours? It's something you have to be somewhat conscious of. And I probably need to be a little more structured in that approach. So that's sort of my, you know, exit planning.
In New Mexico, the bar requires you to have a succession plan. I know
Mhm.
California doesn't have that requirement, and unfortunately, um, that becomes a real problem, especially for smaller firms. If the principal becomes incapacitated, you don't have to be dead to be incapacitated, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then the family winds up, trying to figure out where the trust money goes and, you
Yeah.
know, what to
Well,
do with
I,
the
I'm kind
clients and
of, I'm
notifying them.
sort of just starting to have conversations with firms that might be a good transition for my team if for whatever reason I'm not here, and as a way to sort of creating some relationships. And I'd kind of like to do a dating relationship
Mhm.
where we dated for a while.
Sure.
And that might be, and if I was getting a nice synergy from that relationship, then I can say, well, we might more formally go forward. And I'm always open to those opportunities and exploring them.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I was approached by a big firm that had a policyholder group, and they had lots of trademark work that should have generated good coverage. And I asked them, gee, what would happen if I came on board? And I decided they wouldn't let me go to the green baron or the red baron and the yellow baron and say, hey, can I see what you've got on your plate and any new cases that might have coverage? Oh, no, that's up to the barons. I said, why do you want me? I mean, they ended up spinning off the insurance group. They all left because they brought in some insurers who had business that they wanted. And so the dedication level was not there. And that made me a little concerned about some of the large law firms that have absorbed a policyholder group, but aren't really dedicated to it in a strong and visceral way. So I'm sensitive about that.
Interesting.
So you don't have a senior associate. So, as Mike was commenting
Well,
about
no, I
if,
mean, my most senior associate is a 50-year lawyer, and we've been together for 25 years.
okay.
So he would be considered a partner in terms of his role and what he does in a lot of other firms.
All right.
He just doesn't have the duties and responsibilities associated.
Okay.
And the two, and I have two 25-year lawyers, so they just prefer not to be in a situation where they're responsible for bringing in business and worrying about billing and doing all that stuff, which is fine.
Yeah. But they could step in and take over a case if they needed.
Oh yeah, they do all the time. And some of them, it's just that in terms of oral argument, it's just kind of what I do. There's no reason for them to do that when it's necessary.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're kind of running at the end of our time here, so David, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. Your practice definitely is an interesting setup. Yeah, it's not typical. That's right, and
Yeah.
which is what makes it interesting because
Right.
we're trying to help our listeners, see what that plate of options looks like. There's a lot of different ways to run a practice and and to run a business that's offering legal services and it's interesting to hear how you've put yours together and obviously quite successfully. So.
Right. It's just the challenge is it's not something that's a digital marketing is the answer for, or some sort of AI is going to make it simpler. It's going to require a 5 year from now AI to make it systematic enough to be able to take, my work product and say, okay, here's 75% of a brief for this problem, But I think it's there. It's just not now.
Right. Interesting.
All right. Well, okay. David, it's been a pleasure.
Okay. Take care and good talking to you both. And, if anybody has a need for what we're up to, I'm happy to, field inquiries.
Right. And so what would be the best way for them to contact you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn if they're on LinkedIn or contact me at our website, which is gauntletlaw.com. Or my email is dag@gauntletlaw.com. And our motto is when the insurer says no, throw down the gauntlet.
That's a good one.
That's great. Love it. Yeah, it's very good. Thanks so much again, David, and you have a wonderful day.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Sunrise and the early bird brought me to my senses. It's a chilly wind this morning, not a cloud in the sky. Today I walk the ancient trails among the petroglyphs and cactus, and I hope